Picture a single drop of blood pricked from a fingertip, promising to reveal everything wrong inside your body. No needles, no vials, no fear, just one tiny sample, fed into a sleek black machine the size of a desktop printer, spitting out hundreds of test results in minutes. That was the promise that built a company valued at $9 billion. It was the promise that made a college dropout the youngest self-made female billionaire on the planet. Investors lined up. Pharmacies signed deals. Magazines crowned her the next Steve Jobs. There was just one problem hidden behind the gleaming glass walls of Silicon Valley's brightest star. The machine did not work. The blood drops lied. And the entire empire was built on a foundation that would eventually collapse, taking patients, fortunes, and reputations down with it. Elizabeth Holmes was 19 years old when she walked into a Stanford professor's office and announced she was dropping out to change medicine forever. The year was 2003. She had a fear of needles, a head full of ambition, and an idea she could not let go. What if a single pinprick of blood could run the same battery of tests that normally required full vials drawn by a phlebotomist? She founded a company called Theranos, a blend of the words therapy and diagnosis. She adopted a uniform of black turtlenecks, deliberately echoing the man she idolized. She trained her voice into a deep baritone. Everything about her was engineered to project the image of a visionary founder. And in a world hungry for the next disruptor, that image proved astonishingly, dangerously persuasive. The pitch was irresistible because it touched something universal. Everyone has feared a needle. Everyone has waited anxiously for lab results. Holmes spoke of a future where people would monitor their own health at home, catching diseases early, saving countless lives. She told emotional stories about people dying because they avoided blood tests out of fear. The vision was humanitarian, almost spiritual. And she sold it relentlessly to the most powerful people in America. Her board of directors became a who's who of political royalty. Former secretaries of state, retired generals, senators. These were not biotech experts. They were names, titles, gravity. Their presence signaled credibility no startup could normally buy. But not one of them could evaluate whether the technology actually functioned. They lent their reputations to a science they never understood. The flagship device went through several names, but the world came to know it as the Edison, and later, the Mini Lab. It was supposed to be a miracle of miniaturization, performing dozens of tests on microscopic blood samples. In reality, the engineers struggled with a fundamental problem. Tiny samples are unreliable. Dilute a drop of blood enough to run many tests, and you distort the results. Inside Theranos, devices malfunctioned constantly. Test results swung wildly. Quality control checks failed again and again. Yet, the company kept promising deployment, kept signing partnerships, kept telling investors the technology was nearly ready. Behind closed doors, employees who raised concerns were dismissed, isolated, or pushed out. The gap between the public story and the laboratory reality grew wider every single month, and almost nobody outside knew. To hide the failures, Theranos did something staggering. When clients tested the technology, the company quietly ran samples on traditional, commercially available analyzers made by other manufacturers, machines from Siemens and others, sometimes modified, sometimes hacked to handle smaller samples. They demonstrated their proprietary device for visitors, then secretly processed the actual results elsewhere. It was a magic trick performed at industrial scale. Investors believed they were watching a revolutionary machine work. Journalists believed it. Even Walgreens, which struck a massive deal to put Theranos blood testing centers inside its stores, believed it. The deception extended to faked validation reports, where pharmaceutical company logos were allegedly added to documents the companies never wrote. The illusion was total, and it was protected by an iron wall of secrecy, lawsuits, and intimidating non-disclosure agreements. At the center of the operation, alongside Holmes, was a man named Ramesh Balwani, known as Sonny. He was nearly 20 years older, a former software executive who had made a fortune in the dot-com era. He became Theranos's president and chief operating officer, and, secretly, Holmes's romantic partner, a relationship hidden from the board and investors. Sonny ran the company with a culture of fear. Employees described surveillance, secrecy, and harsh threats against anyone who questioned the technology. Departments were forbidden from talking to one another. People who tried to surface the truth found themselves followed by lawyers, shadowed, and warned. The combination of Holmes's mesmerizing public charisma and Balwani's internal enforcement created a sealed world where the lie could survive far longer than any reasonable observer would have believed possible. The money poured in. Theranos raised over $700 million from venture capitalists, family offices, and billionaires. The media tycoon Rupert Murdoch invested roughly $125 million. The Walton family of Walmart fame, the DeVos family, and others wrote enormous checks. By 2014, the company's valuation reached $9 billion, making Holmes's stake worth around $4.5 billion on paper. She graced the covers of Fortune, Forbes, and Inc. She gave TED Talks and shared stages with presidents. She was celebrated as proof that a young woman could conquer the male-dominated worlds of science and technology. The narrative was too good to question, and in Silicon Valley, where fake it till you make it was practically a religion, almost everyone wanted desperately to believe. But there was a critical difference between Theranos and a typical tech startup. A buggy app costs you frustration. A faulty blood test can cost you your life. Theranos devices were now processing real patient samples inside Walgreens stores in Arizona. Patients received results that could be catastrophically wrong. Some were told they might be having miscarriages when they were not. Others received alarming readings that sent them to emergency rooms for tests that were unnecessary. Still others may have been falsely reassured, told they were healthy when they were not. Doctors began to notice impossible numbers, results that made no medical sense. The unraveling was no longer a question of investor losses or stock valuations. Real human beings were making decisions about their health based on machines that could not be trusted. The wall finally cracked because of a journalist and a few brave insiders. A Wall Street Journal reporter named John Carreyrou received a tip and began investigating. Former employees, including a young scientist named Tyler Schultz, the grandson of board member and former Secretary of State George Shultz, risked everything to tell the truth. They faced relentless legal pressure and surveillance. In October 2015, Carreyrou published the explosive article that exposed the gap between Theranos's claims and reality. The company fought back furiously, denying everything, threatening lawsuits, attacking the credibility of whistleblowers. But the dam had broken. Regulators from the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services inspected the labs and found severe deficiencies. They concluded the testing posed immediate jeopardy to patient health. The myth of the miracle machine was disintegrating in public. The consequences came swiftly and brutally. Regulators banned Holmes from operating a clinical lab for 2 years. Walgreens terminated the partnership and later sued. Investors who had poured in hundreds of millions saw their stakes evaporate. Forbes, which had once valued Holmes's fortune at $4.5 billion, revised her net worth to essentially zero. In 2018, The Securities and Exchange Commission charged Holmes and Balwani with massive fraud, accusing them of deceiving investors out of more than $700 million. Holmes settled with the SEC, paying a penalty and surrendering control of the company. But the criminal authorities were not finished. Federal prosecutors filed wire fraud charges. Theranos itself dissolved in September 2018, its name now permanently synonymous with deception. The $9 billion darling of Silicon Valley had become its most cautionary tale. The trial gripped the nation. Prosecutors painted Holmes as a calculated fraudster who knowingly lied to investors and endangered patients. Her defense argued she was a true believer who failed, not a criminal, and that responsibility lay elsewhere. In a dramatic moment, Holmes testified that Balwani had emotionally and sexually abused and controlled her, allegations he firmly denied. In January 2022, a jury found Elizabeth Holmes guilty on 4 counts of fraud against investors. She was sentenced to more than 11 years in federal prison. Sunny Balwani was convicted separately on 12 counts and received nearly 13 years. Holmes, who had once promised to revolutionize medicine, reported to prison in 2023. The black turtleneck, the deep voice, the visionary aura, all of it had finally been stripped away to reveal a simple, devastating truth. The story of Theranos endures because it exposes a dangerous flaw in how we worship innovation. We are so eager for the next genius, the next disruptor, the next miracle, that we forget to ask the most basic question: does it actually work? Charisma is not competence. A compelling story is not the same as a functioning product. And in medicine, where lives hang on the accuracy of a single result, hype can become deadly. Theranos teaches us to demand evidence, to question the dazzling founder, to look behind the glass walls. If this deep dive into one of history's most shocking frauds gripped you, subscribe to Bull and Bust for more true stories of fortunes built on lies and the moment the truth finally caught up. Hit that subscribe button, and we will see you on the next collapse.